Good morning. Looks like we are live. Coffee with Rich on a Monday morning. Hope you'll be joining me this morning. We're going to be talking to Todd Fox. This is going to be round two. Todd Fox, of course, besides being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, is also the author of Protection for and from Humanity. It's an excellent book. I highly encourage those of you that have not read it yet to pick up a copy. And in the show today, I'll tell you where to get it. I think there's a link in the show notes as well. As you're jumping on this morning, let me go ahead and talk about sponsors and keep this whole little party on the road here. We have Century Martial Arts, makers of the Bob XL. Let me tell you something, man. I've been doing a lot of cardio lately, and I realized that I haven't been doing my striking routine. I've been getting on the bike and riding the bike and doing the Peloton thing, but I'm like, why am I not doing my striking routine? So Bob's going to get his rear end kicked today, I can tell you that. If you want to pick up a Bob XL by Century Martial Arts, click the link below and use our discount code for a pretty substantial discount. We also have the Cool Fire Trainer. Ammo prices are sky high, and I'm sure Todd can attest to that. So why not take your dry fire routine to the next level by picking up a Cool Fire Trainer? Mountain Man Medical Trauma Kits, man. You're far more likely to use trauma medicine than you are your firearm. Everyone knows that. It's statistically more probable. Please pick up a trauma kit from Mountain Man Medical. And if you really want to be cool, pick up a co-branded trauma kit. My good friend, former MARSOC operator, Justin Carroll, we sit down. I had him design the kit to meet his specifications. We're really pleased with it. You can pick them up now before they're even available on back order. Precision holsters, man. You want to carry the Ultra Appendix holster like Mike and I do, then check out precisionholsters.com. They also make amazing competition line. You should be competing anyway. Amazing competition line, and you will not be disappointed with the products that you can get over there. Last but not least, apphemp.com, Appalachian Standard. My good buddy Jesse Ross and I were in the Marines together. Him and his family are growing some amazing CBD products over there. Looks like Tony is on from Brunswick. Good morning, Tony, another former Marine. Semper Fi, brother.
Semper Fi, Tony.
Yeah, Semper Fi. And please like and hit that share button. They got round two with Mr. Todd Fox. I'll go ahead and read your bio, Todd. Todd is a former Marine, law enforcement officer, BJJ black belt, executive protection specialist, former MMA fighter, and author. After leaving the Marines, he began his career in executive protection. Todd has operated around the world providing security and protection to some of the most recognizable names in the music and movie industry, including Guy Ritchie, Madonna, Motley Crue, and Tool, among many, many others. Good morning, Todd. Welcome back to the show.
Morning, Rich. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you.
Yeah, man. I was looking at one of the pictures on your website when I was putting this show together, and Tommy Lee's got you in a pretty wicked rear naked choke, man.
Yes, it's better to give than receive in the case of rear naked choke. So not a comfortable position, but I guess good enough for a photo op.
Yeah, it was a good photo op. And there's also on Todd's website, which of course I have links to in the show notes today, some pretty cool pictures. One of them is, I think you're teaching somebody to put Guy Ritchie in a rear naked. Am I right on that?
It is. Yeah, it's a guy named Simon Hayes, who they call Purple, who is one of the first guys to open up a jiu-jitsu school in London. And ironically, I think I was a 4-stripe purple belt teaching those guys on the set of a film. And he was a brand new white belt, and he beat me to black belt. So,
wow.
Yeah, he was moving at the speed of light.
And who did he get his black belt under?
He's somebody on the Carlson Gracie side, and I can't remember his instructor's name, Junior something or other, but it was a Carlson Gracie school.
Jason Johnson is on this morning. John says, hi from Yukon, Oklahoma, coin number 1919. If you want to find out what a coin number is, you're going to have to check out AmericanWarriorSociety.com. I'd be remiss if I didn't say good morning. My name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, America's #1 self-defense podcast. And if you want to find out more about the American Warrior Society, please check out the links below and find out if becoming a member of our community, our training community, is the right thing for you. Alan Kelly is on.
Right here.
Hey, look at that.
Number 2177.
2177. Outstanding. And Todd, I tell you, you have an impressive bio. It's very succinct, but what does that bio overlook about you?
That I do everything else like a normal, standard, average person. Nothing that I've done, I don't think in and of itself is spectacular or special. It doesn't list all of the failures. It doesn't list any of the issues along the way. The best part about me is just to accept that and kind of keep going. So it doesn't list any of that. And that's one of the things I see. I see a ton of bios and all these lists of great accolades, and all that shit is meaningless when you're really trying to understand a person. But that's what I would say is missing.
Yeah, it's that's true, and I'll go ahead, and I've never said this on air or anywhere, but I think that in the spirit of failures and screw ups, my only time on executive protection, I ended up getting fired because I had a negligent discharge in France, and that's a fact. So yes, I have been there and suffered the humiliation of having to, pack your sea bag and move to another ship and join another unit and claw yourself out of that hole that you create for yourself sometimes, and take it on the chin and move forward. But that's not in my bio, and I've never mentioned it. But yeah, I've screwed up along the way. That's for sure.
No, everybody has. There's a huge difference when you are talking to people and you're working with people, and they somehow want to make you believe they've never screwed up or they're infallible in some way. And the reality is that all of us make mistakes, and all of us hopefully learn from the mistakes. But it's to me, the one thing you never see on a bio. Hey, just to let you know, I screwed up all these things.
Yeah, I was someone, and of course this happened in 1992, so it was a very long time ago, but it was an opportunity for growth and learning. I really became a better Marine because of it. I stopped thinking my crap didn't stink. And I really laser focused in on being a better warfighter from that day forward. And as painful as it was in the moment, it was a great opportunity to get better,
Yes, sir. I wasn't alive in 1992, Rich. What was it like back then?
Yeah, right. You may look younger than me, but you're not much younger than me.
No, that's true.
Brett Parker is on. He said, good morning, fellas. Coin number 876. Conrad is on. Says, good day, guys. Always good when I catch the show. Jeff is on. Terry is on. Dr. T.C. Fuller, good morning, sir. One of the things, man, I'm so glad you started the show with the way you did, Todd. I can tell this is going to be a great show. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, man, there's a rumor going around the community that you're a sommelier. Is that true?
I took a level 1 som course like 20 years ago. And I don't know how much I have retained, but I was in and around the wine community for many years, mostly because of my clients. It's a big thing in entertainment executive clients. And so I with those guys, you have to know your stuff. And I didn't want to kind of sit around and not understand what was happening. So I spent some time studying that and understanding that and learning about it. So I have recently, since COVID, I haven't spent a lot of time with it, but yes, it is true that I'm an enophile.
Now, do you have a favorite varietal?
Yeah, it's an Italian varietal called Sangiovese Grosso. So it's in the region of Montalcino.
Wow, how much do you give that a try?
You will, buddy, if you can find it down there. If not, you give me a call and I'll send you something.
Well, yeah, and I was just in Italy, I guess a year and a half ago. My wife and I spent a few weeks over there and loved it. I wish I'd have known. I'd have been seeking it out.
We'll get you some.
Heck yeah. So let's discuss. I'm going to jump right into your book I just mentioned a moment ago, Todd, A Protection for and from Humanity. And one of the things that you talk about very early on in the book is the difference in the mission profile between a military law enforcement guy and, say, a protection specialist. And I'm going to take that protection specialist identity tag and kind of juxtapose it with maybe a civilian defender in that they have a very similar one. And the question I guess I have for you is, how does understanding and analyzing the mission and probably the problems that it poses affect everything?
Yeah. So one of the things that happens with us is we get a large percentage of our guys coming from the military and law enforcement, and they think they can just kind of operate the same way as a protector, right? Whether they're civilian protector or other. And a big part of that, and I wrote about it very briefly, but is kind of understanding what your function is, and then really what you're capable of in that realm, in that role. And I think you and I've kind of touched on it, but when you are working in a military law enforcement capacity, you're under the authority of a government, whether it's a local government, a state government, or in the military, federal government. And when you're working as a protector, you're not. So you don't have that blessing, you don't have that certification or that authority to do certain things, especially when you're overseas. You're in a host nation, and unless they have signed off on you in that particular capacity, you're literally beholden to everything and everyone around you, and you're almost like a second-class citizen from that perspective, because you have zero authority, again, unless they've somehow managed to bless you. The other factor that shifts normally is the mindset of going from, I'm going after that thing, I'm pursuing that thing. So if I was a law enforcement officer and I was pursuing a bad guy, or if I was a Marine pursuing a bad guy, I work or function in that capacity. Whereas on the protective side, it's literally the opposite. It can't become any more opposite than I'm basically taking my client, my entity, and leaving. And if I'm fighting, it's because I couldn't get out quick enough. So there are a lot of major differences, but those are the two for me that kind of stand out. And I think there is a major correlation between a civilian walking around in the United States and a guy operating, doing protective security in a foreign country.
Yeah, and I want to read from Todd's book here, because he has an interesting little and I don't think a lot of people think about it. And the reason I say that is because you can jump on YouTube and watch any number of former soft guy that is talking about, that's giving a lot of advice. And I'm like, man, you're in the polar opposite world to give some of this advice, because military and law enforcement possess the official authority. Protectors don't. Military and law enforcement plan the attack and they go on the offensive, whereas a protector has to plan the defensive. Military and law enforcement pursues subjects, whereas a protector are being pursued. Military and law enforcement move to the fight, whereas protectors evacuate from the fight. And finally, military and law enforcement have vast tools and resources, whereas a protector has limited. And again, that's right from your book. And I think that the guys that are coming straight from the military, man, they have to shift a lot of mental gears to make that transition, man. That's a huge transition when you put it out the way you did.
Yeah, the last line, which you stated and I omitted, is actually another very critical factor, because when you have a huge team of people supporting, and the only exception to this in my experience would be like a PMC, right? Because a PMC essentially is just an extension of the government if it's a DOS or a DOD project. But, you don't have that normally if you're working in a 1-man, a 2-man, a 3-man, even like a 12-man team in a foreign country. 12 guys isn't going to get it done with anything significant. So, you don't have the resources that you're used to as a military person or as a law enforcement officer. Just it doesn't work out that way. And so, you're not going into a structure that has everything kind of afforded to you. Everything's planned for you and handed to you. And that creates a lot of challenges. But the one really cool thing it does is it makes you learn and think and understand, because it's not just given to you. You're the one that's coming up with it. And so you learn to be very creative with very little. I've lost you on audio, Rich, somehow, some way. There you go.
Me and that mute button, man. Gordon is on. Good morning, Gordon. Coin number 1688 from Ohio. Please take a quick moment to hit the share button If we hit 45 live viewers, I'm going to send somebody a customized tumbler. Pretty awesome. So one of the things, we talked about shifting those mental gears to go from military and law enforcement into the protective community. But part of that is the mindset piece. And what can someone watching this morning do to create and or maintain the correct mindset to win the fight?
Well, I think the mindset is what creates your expectations, the things that you do, right? The things that you're capable of. It kind of presents options or removes options for you. And so for me, a big part is kind of understanding what's in my realm and how I need to think to not just survive, but to be successful in my realm. And so I'm trying to always integrate some things that will be helpful and make them habits in my daily life. Whether it's being able to have situational awareness, and I'm looking around constantly and paying attention to my surroundings versus my phone, whether it's shooting and going out on a semi-regular basis shooting, whether it's training and I'm getting up every day. It's just a habit to get up, stretch out, warm up, and then eat, a healthy meal and go train or have something other than a sugar-based snack, whatever it is. So for me, that all leads to the mindset, because everything's leading up to the same goal, and everything is just a little piece that will either help me or hurt me in my end objective. And that creates, for me, it's created a stronger mind, because I'm thinking about everything that I'm doing and I know what it's for. That really helps me kind of hone it in, because really what we're doing is conditioning our brain when we talk about mindset, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I want to say in your book, you talk about, little things like cold showers and stuff like this. And I mean, I remember when training for a marathon or a triathlon, I can't remember, but I was on a mobile training team in the Marine Corps. So I'm traveling all over the country. And I remember, like, if my schedule said I've got to put in a 12-mile day that day, and I've got to be at the recruiting station to do an inspection at, say, 7 o'clock, then what that means is I'm going to have to get up at like 2 or 3, lace up my shoes and go running down the interstate by myself in the cold when it's raining. And I remember sometimes, man, I would roll my feet over on the side of the bed, look out the window, and just almost have tears in my eyes. Like, I don't want to do this. I want to go back to bed. Right, Todd?
I know that feeling, man. I know that feeling. And I know a lot of guys are out there talking about, they just kind of flush that away. But as an old guy, I still have it, because the option for me to just stay in better, and the option for me to take the easy route is still available. So it's going to be a fight, right? Because your body and your mind want to do what's easy. And it never goes away. I thought when I was younger, when I was 17 or 18 in the Marine Corps, I thought, as I get older, this will just be easier. And to be honest, people are almost more forgiving, like, oh, you're old, so you can be fat, or, oh, you're old, so you don't understand that, or you don't, you can't fit into that realm, or you can't do that thing, so it's okay. And we're almost led down that path as we get older to just accept, like, it's just part of getting old. And it's not, man. It's still very hard to do some of those things. And some days, like you mentioned, it's just simply hard to get out of bed with the task you have, and you just have to suck it up. It's almost like jumping out of a plane, where it's like, no, this isn't a smart thing to do. Don't do it. And you go, right? You take that leap.
Yeah, and I make that distinction because if you're watching this morning and maybe you're an older guy and you kind of let yourself go a little bit, COVID has been hard on you, whatever. Pick, and Todd, I want your opinion on this, because I think mindset is so important, and everybody thinks they have mindset. And just like my good friend, attorney Andrew Branca says, 100% of men think they're good shots. 99% of them are wrong. And I'd say 100% of the men in our community think, I'm the wolf and, all this kind of crap. And maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but create a goal out in the distance, even if it's just running a 5K. You don't have to start out with a half marathon, a marathon, or something like that. Do a 5K. Pick one out there in the fall and get your butt out there every morning. Beat that pavement, whatever you got to do. You're going to have sore knees, a bad back. I got it, but do something. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I try to do that, and I try to do it also in context when I can, to do something maybe that I don't want to do or I don't like to do. Yesterday I went and, I trained for a couple hours with some very young kids who are literally about half my age. They're 24, 25 years old. And although I love training, my body doesn't recover the same way. So I went to do cryo. Well, I do it in an enclosed chamber and it's 3 minutes at -250. I don't like that. I really don't like it. And I've done it many times, weekly. But it's kind of that thing, like, I know this is good. I know this is what I need to do. And it's a little thing. It's 3 minutes, but it's a shitty 3 minutes for me because I don't like that feeling, that level of cold. So I do that. And then I do another thing and then another thing. And all these little shitty things kind of create this ability to not just mentally deal with it, not just physically deal with it, but to just accept that there's going to be kind of shitty times or shitty exposures. And those shitty exposures actually help me. And I don't know, in a weird way, you learn to embrace, and I know we say embrace the suck in the Marine Corps, but you just kind of learn to embrace what maybe doesn't feel good, but is good. And I'm not trying to, I know there's a ton of guys out there right now with all these cliches that they're selling people and guys that are super gung ho and running around doing crazy shit, but it really is just tackling little bits. And over time, those little bits become very big things. And you just become conditioned to those little tiny bits over time. And it's like an inoculation of sorts, right? It's just little bits of stress, little bits of pain. And they add up and they condition you to be stronger or harder or tougher or more focused than you would naturally be without enduring those small hardships.
And I think there's a good correlation with jiu-jitsu there. If you would agree with that, Todd, you're getting crushed in side control, man. Your first month, you're going to be tapping pretty quick to that pressure. But after you've been training for a while, right, you're gonna slow your breathing down and work the problem, right?
It's true. I think one of the greatest values of jiu-jitsu that I don't hear a lot about is just that the mental component of understanding that it's problem solving, it's problem analysis solution, and you have to understand what's critical and what's not critical, what you need to deal with now and what you can kind of hold off on, what you can potentially defend and what you don't have time to play with. And part of that is just enduring certain things and waiting. Okay, just slow it down, breathe, make yourself safe. Yes, it's going to suck for a little bit, but at some point, that person's going to give in or change positions or change angles or go for something. And then that's your window of opportunity to act. And I agree. I mean, the mental component in jiu-jitsu of just being able to endure. And Master Elio used to talk about that before he died. And he would talk about, if I can just survive, if I can just defend against that thing, as far as I'm concerned, you can't beat me. I win because you can't beat me. You're bigger, stronger, younger, meaner, whatever. And yes, I didn't submit you, but you couldn't beat me. And that mindset, I think, is extremely useful in life. I think there's a lot of correlations between the struggles in jiu-jitsu or any martial art, boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, combat art, and life.
Well, and I think you alluded to that, what Master Elio had said, because you mentioned that fighting some higher level guys and like they may have beat me in points, but they didn't beat me. And I love that because you had an opportunity to sub me. You tried everything you could, and you only got away with, getting 2 additional points on me. That's not the same thing as victory.
No, it's interesting, the perception of that. I came from a place, and the school that I'm at now, still the same school, that, we never really spent a lot of time talking about or looking at points. It was always about submission. And consequently, when I went to compete, whether it was MMA or no-gi or gi jiu-jitsu, I only focused on submission. When I didn't get a submission, I didn't feel like I won, even if I won by 2 points or 4 points. And conversely, when I lost by an advantage or 2 points, I didn't feel like I actually lost. Yes, I know I didn't, walk home with the first place medal, but I didn't feel like I lost. And I had a Pan Am's match where I went against a very strong competitor, and I ended up beating him by 2 points in the semifinals. And I still to this day feel like I didn't beat him. We were talking to the guy that it happened with a couple weeks ago. It's not much of a win. It's 2 points can go either way. So yes, I agree 100% with what you're saying.
Guile is on this morning. He says, "Good morning, Rich, Todd, everybody. Sorry I'm late fighting the COVID thing, but I'm still watching the show. I hope you'll get healed up real soon, Guile."
You're going to get healed up.
Yeah. In your book, Todd, you talk about the 720 concept. Can you break that down for those watching this morning?
Yeah. So in the Marines and in PMC training, there's a lot of talk about 360, right? Everything around you, head on a swivel. And that's very true. It's not wrong. It's absolutely right. But when I got out into an operational environment, what I realized was a lot of stuff happens above you and below you. So stuff falls off buildings. There are holes in the ground. And even like room clearing, when you think about that, the guys that I operated with on a tactical team in law enforcement very rarely looked up. I mean, you would have to really drill that home. So the concept of 720 is 360 in a circle around you, but then above and below you. So think of two circles or two loops. And it's really more of a concept. So it kind of forces their attention back above and below as well as everything that's around them. So that was my kind of key idea behind using 720 versus 360. 360 is absolutely still right. It's just, a little bit more mind opening from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to consider that. And in that same vein, Todd, how do we shorten the decision cycle to take appropriate actions? Because I would imagine that speed is relative to all parties in a fight, right?
Yeah, the only answer that I've ever found with that's consistent across different techniques is really training, right? So training exposures to the most likely scenarios you're going to face, training ad nauseum, training under stress, and creating that synapse, the connection between neurons, where you have that pathway that exists where you can recognize something and you're able to fire quicker because of it. And I think in the book, I mentioned it very briefly, but one of the guys' ideas that I had followed for quite some time was Klein's with the recognition prime decision making, because I've had exposure to that thing, right? And again, kind of getting back to the inoculation, my body's not going to react in terms of stress the same way when it's something I do every single day. We can talk about jujitsu or anything else. My decision making cycle is very fast. I can cycle through the OODA loop extremely quick when it's something I've done every day for 30 years. So for me personally, answering that question, the best way in my life has been to train ad nauseum, to train in different environments, to train, different scenarios, but the most likely scenarios with high reps and stress. I don't know. And if you have some ways, I'm 100% open. I'm always looking for ways to get better, but that's been the shortest cut for me, which isn't too much of a shortcut.
Yeah, I think your point is valid. It's recognition prime decision making, man, is incredibly important, so that those lines in the sand, if you will, to borrow a metaphor, have already been mentally drawn in your head. If they do this, I will do that. It's not now I got to make a mental leap to what do I do? I've already made the decision. Now I just got to execute that decision, right?
Yeah. If then thinking is extremely valuable, because you've set that tripwire, and now that thing that I said, if this happens, I'm going to do X. Now it's time to do X because that just happened. And that's the mental preparation. That's why, I don't know how many times I've said it and guys kind of roll their eyes, but your brain is your primary weapon. And I don't know how many times I've used a ton of different tools, especially in the States. Like in my case, I've never shot anybody in the United States, so I don't understand, why I would fixate on it. Yes, I love guns, and yes, they're important. They're great tools. But as you mentioned earlier, trauma kits and medical skills or hand-to-hand combat, or all these other things that happen all the time that we just kind of flush away, say, well, it's more fun to shoot guns, so I'm going to do that. Those are pretty serious things. And the mental component, the brain that drives that, and the advanced preparation, which you noted, the if-then thinking and setting that, okay, this is a potential. And if this thing happens, I'm doing X and I'm ready to go. I've made that connection already. For me, that's been the solution to most problems that I've faced overseas.
Yeah. And this morning I knew at some point it would come up. So I brought two books with me. One is your book, Todd, and the other one is The Law of Self-Defense, because, you know, we talk about rules of engagement overseas, or ROE, and here in the States, it's like, what's the ROE? Well, it's right here. And if you can have all the skills in the world, but I think part for me, the recognition prime decision-making process has to include the 5 elements of the law of self-defense, because any use of force, from verbal to physical to lethal force, I mean, anywhere in there can land me in jail or prison for a very long time. And that's someplace I don't want to be, right?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be there. Yeah, I think a lot of guys, to be fair, don't even know where to look for things like, you know, for us, for example, state statutes on use of force, use of deadly force in particular. They don't understand how it works. They don't understand, you know, what criteria needs to be met. Not that they need to be thinking about that in the moment. They need to think about that well ahead of time, especially if
Yes.
you live in a violent place. There's a high percentage of likelihood of some type of violent encounter occurring. And so you kind of need to know now, not when it happens, you know, what your options are. And I think that also dictates how you present what occurred to the people that are coming to look at it or investigate it. They need to hear it a certain way, because you can be 100% justified in what you're doing, but because you say it a certain way, all of a sudden it's not justified. And understanding that is huge. And the difference between what we would do in the US and what we would do overseas are also extremely different. Like you said, whether it's, you know, rules of engagement or use of force, I mean, there are parameters. And yes, I want to live first. And I hear a lot of guys like, God, you'll deal with that other stuff later. I don't agree with that. I think you deal with that first. And yes, priority is preservation of life. And in this case, we're talking about our own lives. Maybe it's somebody else's life, and then our life, and lastly, the person that is attacking us. But you got to know that stuff in advance. You got to think through those options, because you need to make an informed decision, and you're going to have to be able to make that decision in a literal split second.
Yeah. And again, knowing in Andrew Brinka's book, he breaks down every state's law. Self-defense laws are a little bit different. So if you're operating in different states, there's 2 states in America where you cannot use self-defense in third party, meaning, you know, I'm an armed American. I travel, let's say I'm pumping gas, and whereas in Tennessee or Mississippi, it'd be perfectly appropriate for me to go in and rescue a clerk who's being held at gunpoint by the use of lethal force. Whereas in 2 states, I can't do that. And if I do that, it's absolute murder and I'm going to jail. It doesn't matter that my intentions were great and my morals and ethics were appropriate. I have violated the legal doctrine in that state. So your point of a lot of folks don't understand the statutes in that states, but to take it another step further, it's how the laws, the Supreme Courts within each of those states interpret that law. I mean, look at the problem the McCluskeys got into in I think it's St. Louis.
Yeah, good example.
Yeah.
Coming out. So to be very specific in that case, all you have to do is go back and read the RSMO, the Revised Statutes of Missouri, and that particular one is under Section 563. It's very clear that they're justified in that. And I'm not talking about race or politics or anything. They're on their property. You know, a group of people had just broke down a wrought iron fence that was valued at you know, several $1,000s, which is a very special type of felony. And they were in fear for their life. Just several nights prior, there were 2 complex ambushes that occurred on law enforcement. And if you look at the shot spotter counts, it was well over 1,000 shots fired in the city that night. And I think I want to say that was around June 1st or 2nd of last year. So it's just passed that particular ambush or ambushes. Those ambushes occurred, and then, you know, within a very short period of time later, that issue happened with the McCluskeys. And you know, also you know, those guys are attorneys, and I don't know them. I'm not familiar with intimate details of their history, but they understand the law, and they were legally in possession of firearms on their own property. And you know, I think it's reasonable to believe that they were in fear for their lives at that point. And you know, you look at that, and this is another really important component that I think as I get older, I start to understand better. The law can say whatever it wants. here's the law in writing, and here are the law enforcement officers, and here's the in that case, Kim Garner, the circuit city attorney for St. Louis, their interpretation or how they want to spin it or how they want to present it, and then whatever's occurring socially also are very important factors that I never got trained up on. And so the political climate is extremely important, and sometimes more important than the actual facts of the case now. And I know that's not nice to talk about or hear, but that's just a reality of the America that we live in today, I believe.
No, you're spot on. And I want to put one final nail in this recognition prime decision making, because it is so important, man. And we've talked a lot about if then thinking, and reading the newspaper. If there's an incident, put yourself in that moment and think through it, because you're likely to find yourself in that situation. But I was training a major law enforcement group recently, me and Mike were, and the two student instructors, law enforcement officers, veteran law enforcement officers, were like, we're going to do some training on recognition, prime decision making. And I got my clipboard and I'm evaluating them, and they say, okay, so I've got this target. Maybe I talked about it last time. I seemed like I talked about this a couple times because it just blew me away. And he's got the other officer there, and he's like, address the threat, and the target turns, and there's an unarmed man there with his palms open like this. And the officer fires 2 or 3 hits, center mass, comes back, scans, and reholsters. I'm like, what the hell just happened here? Recognition, prime decision making. And that's what he said. Well, Rich, we're doing recognition, prime decision making. So you've primed this officer to shoot unarmed people when they turn. It's like, guys, what are we doing here? I don't understand this. And if somebody was filming this and it was going on WATE television, what does that just tell the world that these 2 white cops are training to do? Like you said, optics, man, optics.
Yeah, I had a friend, state law enforcement agency, who, because of the colors of targets and the shapes of faces and stuff, and all the kind of pushback, decided that he would use his face for the target. And so all the recruits and all the troopers would shoot this guy's face, literally, who was like a small white man who it was his, and he voluntarily said, what, I'm going to get rid of all the drama, all the BS, and we're going to create these targets with my face. And shockingly, I don't think that decision was based on ego in this one particular case, but it circumvents a lot of drama that way.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so I think we've put the fork in that one. In your book, Todd, you talk about Colonel Cooper's principles of personal defense. Are they still relevant today, man? And if so, how are they relevant?
I think, and again, I know a lot of people argue, that's old school. We've advanced past that. I don't think we have. And I think, Colonel Cooper came out with this, I believe, in the 70s. And at the time, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have cell phones. And people, I think, generally were more aware of their environments, and they were looking at things and they were assessing things, and they knew kind of what fit into an environment and what didn't, and what were indicators of bad things to come. That was part of cultural training or understanding. And today, we have these attention sucks called cell phones, and we have the internet and social media, and very few people are paying attention, and we have earbuds in. And so I would argue that we need Cooper's color codes more now than we did in the 70s. And because there are more threats and you are more distracted, this really simple system of mindset or awareness or mental conditions, I think, is extremely useful. And it's really simple too, so you can explain it to a young kid or an old lady, or it doesn't have to be for military law enforcement. Even though it applies to them, it's really most useful for the average everyday person, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree with you. David Garrett is on. Guile says he doesn't have COVID. He's part of the fight against COVID. God bless you.
Got it. Yeah. See how quick he recovered just from those well wishes.
There you go. Joseph is on. Tony says, off the topic, but what are your thoughts on the court decision to overturn California's assault weapons ban?
I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And on that note, what are your thoughts, Todd, about the Supreme Court, their decision to hear the New York State rifle and pistol versus Corlett? Are you up on that one?
Not really. I haven't paid attention to that recently, but I mean, I am obviously pro 2A. I have a lot of clients that aren't. That's the beauty of America. They can be whatever they want to be, but I believe in the Constitution, and I do, again, just like Cooper's color codes, I don't think it's outdated. I think it's more relevant now than it's ever been. But no, so get me up to date, Rich.
Sure. The case involves New York State handgun licensing laws that have been in place since I think like 1913, in that if you want to carry a gun in New York, you're going to have to show proper cause, whatever that may mean to someone in order to get a handgun permit. So the Supreme Court's going to hear this case, and a lot of 2A people are very excited. They're like, oh, this is going to reverse all this nonsense. But at the same time, it could go really bad. It's going to be really good or really bad. I don't see it being neutral,
Well, I keep a commission, and I'm sure you are well aware of HR 218. In New York, in my experience, they don't recognize it, in particular in New York City. And so that just gives you an idea of kind of the mindset, not just amongst politicians and maybe the citizenry, but also amongst law enforcement officers there. It's just a different realm altogether. And I've talked to some guys that I know on a task force in New Jersey, and they're like, hey, we have problems coming across over into New York all the time. So I don't know if it'll hurt or help, but I'll tell you what, it's definitely a different world there. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is. And I'll be throwing up some prayers for that, because it has the potentiality to be really favorable for our community and for our nation, perhaps. Next question I have for you, Todd, is in your book, you mentioned context. I'm quoting here: context provides insight and assists in filling in information gaps. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So for me, context is the thing that I'm always searching for. I would say it's analogous with puzzle pieces, right? So a single puzzle piece by itself isn't much for me to go off of. But if I can find 2 or 3 puzzle pieces and put them together, I can start looking for other colors or other shapes or other textures or other angles or whatever it is that particular piece of context gave me in the way of clues or information. And so in the intelligence realm, it would be akin to, data, info, intel, where, data are these singular pieces of information, and then you can start connecting those pieces of information. And now you have information, and then you start to string that along and add information or context to the existing information. And now you have intelligence, which, as we know, is something that we use to drive our decisions and make choices. So for me, context really are those small little bits and pieces that in some way connect or give you a better understanding of that situation. And so generally speaking, the more context you have, the better or more favorable decision you can make.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I've said it before, I'm addicted to context, because context is everything. And I think that's one of the things that, with the advent of fake news, I remember the first time I heard that phrase. I don't know if you remember it, Todd, but I remember going, fake news. But then as you open your aperture and you see like white officer kills black teenager, well, that completely misses the context. And then you watch the video. Oh, the black teen, and again, race is not a matter, but the media, it seems to be stoking this flame.
Yes.
You see the teenage black kid that pulls a handgun and all this stuff, fires a couple rounds, and the officer is forced to use deadly force. I'm like, why are you writing this? Why are you writing this news article to be inflammatory without context? I just don't understand that.
Yeah, you obviously know the reason is because it sells. It's sensational, and the thing is, if you want to include race, which I agree with you, it's not relevant, right, in most cases, and in the vast majority of cases, and so if you want to include race, let's include it on everything, on every single time that it happens, because when they omit it, typically, okay, well, I know what that means if they omitted it. It's really, context can be something that is fake context is added to create some perspective that they want. And usually that comes down to dollar signs, right? It's views, it's clicks, it's whatever, to make them more money or get them more attention. But I think you bring up a good point. There are entities, groups, sources, a lot of them that are providing the wrong context. And when you get a bad piece of context, it's devastating, just the way that when you get good context, it really is enlightening and opens a lot of doors for you. So that's a good point. And I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about that in the terms of small pieces of context, but certainly in the news, it's impossible to miss both misinformation and disinformation that's out there. So that's a good little point. That's probably worthy of an article, Rich.
Well, yeah. And I love your point about the puzzle piece. My wife, who's watching this morning, is probably doing a puzzle if I know my wife. And that is a great point. Of that little puzzle piece doesn't tell me anything about what the entire picture is. And the other thing that you said, Todd, is also incredibly important for people listening this morning. And that is, a bit of information by itself is not intelligence. It's just not. It's just a piece of information. It may become an intelligence product that will help drive our future operations, but in the moment, it's just a piece of information, right?
Yeah, we throw that word around a lot. And when I say we, that's a broad we. That's not me and you. But I hear, I got some intel. I got intel this, intel that. And I'm like, well, so basically you've taken these data points, put them together. You had the information. Now you verify, you scrub that data. You looked at it, you understand how it relates to all these things. And then, okay, no, you don't have any finished product. You've just got information, some general information.
A lot of people get that wrong. And I think that goes over to the next question I want to ask you this morning, Todd, and that is, you wrote in the book, quote, "The situation dictates the tactics." And I would submit that a lot of people forget that. I'm going to read that one more time, and I would like for you to unpack that, Todd. Explain what you mean. The situation dictates the tactics.
Yeah, and I probably first heard that in the early 90s in the Marine Corps, and I think it was right then, and it certainly applies to me now. In not just in the Marine Corps. If you think about the law enforcement side and you think about use of force in Graham versus Connor, the totality of the circumstances, right? That's going to decide what I should do, and maybe how I should do it. There's what I can do, but if it omits certain factors, that's not the best choice, even though I can do it. And so for us, we train for very specific situations, and we train with specific solutions to those situations. But a lot of times we're faced with situations and we have existing tactics, but those aren't the appropriate tactics for it. And I'm seeing that now, a lot of guys training to do something that maybe there are very few situations that would justify using those tactics, and yet they're training those tactics ad nauseum. And then the situations that occur 99% of the time, they're not training for that at all. So I think, again, you've touched on this with the military, law enforcement versus, protector or guardian, same kind of concept here. You have to take in all of that context. You have to understand the environment. And that's another factor, is part of it's internal, meaning how I see it, how I feel about it. Part of it's external, what's kind of being put on me relative to my environment, and then what I've trained for in advance of that. That all kind of dictates the outcome. But for me, I can't think of too many times where the situation didn't dictate the tactics for us as we worked. Almost always the situation, and when I say situation, and I think you probably mean the same, situation that's occurring, the events that are unfolding, but also situation in terms of where I'm at, what I'm doing, and what I can do in that particular moment, what my skill set is. So I think that holds true, and the way that I use it, I think, is in alignment with the way the Marine Corps used it 30 something years ago when I first learned the term.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's incredibly important, and one that's overlooked or misunderstood. And And again, you're just putting yourself into peril when you forget that maxim. One of the equations that you have in the book is B plus A equals D. I believe I have that correctly. Can you explain that equation?
Yeah, it's called the bad algorithm. And once again, this is not me making this up. This once again comes from the Marine Corps. But the bad algorithm is baseline plus anomaly equals decision. Or in other words, the first thing that I do is establish what's normal so that I can identify an anomaly. And when I have an anomaly from the baseline, I must make a decision in that moment. And so anomalies, and I deviate a little bit from the Marine Corps because I'm not in the military anymore, and doing protection is not the same as being Marine. But the way that we use it is we see anomalies in a couple different ways. So we see here's the baseline. And if we have an anomaly where we add something to an environment that was never there before, that's what we call an anomaly above the baseline, right? That's a tick up. And then we also have what we call an anomaly below the baseline, or a negative anomaly, which would be something that's missing from an environment that is normally there. And on that, we have two types of anomalies that occur. So one is what we call a benign anomaly, which is the vast majority of anomalies that occur are totally benign. And the others are critical, the ones that can hurt us, kill us, the ones that we're looking for. So baseline plus anomaly equals decision. So I have this baseline established through training, through exposure, through situational awareness. I know what's normal here. Then this anomaly occurs. Some people are added to it in a certain way that doesn't fit and is potentially critical. Now I need to make a decision. And for us, this is not Marine Corps, but for us, we break it down because I need to simplify for my guys, my team, and the people I deal with. We break it down into three areas. And for us, it's the 3 C's is what we call it. So when we have to make a decision, it's either continue as planned, meaning that we have the skills, the tools, we have the authority to do a certain thing that would keep us safe in that given environment. So we're good to meet the threat and deal with it. And the loss we are estimating would not be as significant as if we didn't do this. So we continue on as planned. The second C is to change. So we change route, we change course, we change position, we change timing, we change, time of day or whatever it may be. We make a change, a deviation from our original plan. And then the third C is to cancel. We just, pull chocks. This is over. We're GTFO. We're going to get the heck out and we'll deal with this at some other time. So basically, we don't have the skills or the tools or the authority to deal with this thing in this moment. And so we're not going to take that particular risk. It's not worth it. So baseline plus anomaly equals decision. That decision for us comes in one of 3 ways: continue as planned, change our plan, or cancel the operation.
Yeah, I love it. And I've got a video that a buddy of mine sent me when he was with Triple Canopy in Iraq, like in 2004, 2005. And they're in armored Mercedes and they're moving somebody to the airport, and their route dictates that they go down this road. And as soon as they start going down the road, there's some sticks and bricks across the road, stones. And you can hear them discussing in the car, like, I don't know about this, man. And they go anyway. And guess the next thing happens, RPG starts flying from everywhere. So if they would have just used that bad algorithm, like, I have an anomaly. There's not supposed to be something across this road. I need to make a decision. And like, to your point, it could have been continue, which is obviously what they decided to do, which was, of course, the incorrect choice.
Yeah, it's much more black and white in those environments, I would say, than it is in the daily lives of most people in America. And then, a little bit more gray when you're talking about doing protection, around the world. But then when you start getting into war zones, combat zones, you definitely have that. Hey, this is bad. It's not worth the risk. Let's go. I've had that a couple of times. In fact, the last time that I remember that happening was a couple of years ago in northern Iraq, between Erbil and Mosul. And there was an issue that occurred. And we got a piece of information from a lady who runs a security and intel company over there, who I believe is still the OSAC chair over there. Her name's Ellen Pope. Great company, Talos, Talos. And we got a piece of information that something was occurring in an area that's close to where we're going, and none of the guys want to quit or stop doing something. And we were dealing with a business entity, so this wasn't a PMC job. This was a private sector group, and they wanted to do this business thing there, and it needed us to go to a certain place. And right next to where we were supposed to go to, bad things were happening, according to this report. Long story short, we decided not to go, which is a very hard thing for guys to do. And within, I would say, 2 or 3 hours, they blew up a place next to where we'd be. So whether it would have affected us or not, I don't know. But certainly that bad algorithm is very helpful for protectors. And I think it applies to most people when you think about that process. Like if you just slow down for a second and think, okay, is this something I'm ready for if it happens? Is there something I could do to lessen the risk by moving, getting off the X, by changing the route, the plan, whatever? Or is it just not worth the risk right now, today? And I also talked to somebody about this, I want to say a couple weeks ago, but even pulling into a grocery store parking lot to do some shopping, and you see some things that don't look right. Right. And let's say, it's a grandma, or it's your wife who doesn't have a firearm, not yours, but or somebody that doesn't have self-defense skills. Do they really need to get that food or those toiletries or whatever they're getting from the grocery store at that moment? They pull into that spot. They see some things. They don't feel good about it. It doesn't make sense. The lighting conditions are bad. You know what? Either go to another store or come back the next day, or come back at a different time of day, and don't have that exposure. It's not necessary. And that's a very hard thing for guys like us to do, but it's a very smart thing to do.
Yeah. Don't be in a rush to get punched in the face.
Yes.
And I tell you, that's the benefit, I think, of being more mature than I was in my younger days, and being an aggressive young Marine.
Yes. And I created all of my own problems back then. Not to say that I don't create my problems now, but, I created most of the problems that were totally and completely unnecessary by hurrying, by rushing, by doing something that wasn't needed in that particular moment.
Yeah, I've told the story before, well, I won't tell it, but yeah, I screwed up one time again. We were doing some training, and Seeklander was on the roof, and he had a radio, and he was supposed to radio me when my assault team was going to go in, and I couldn't get him on the radio, and we missed the time back. I'm like, hey, screw it, we're going. And I ran in and got my team punched in the face. And it's one of those things that nowadays, I don't think I would have done that. Just run in without a single bit of information.
Yeah, listen, Rich, the two of us are the only two guys that screw up. So everybody else are heroes, and the two of us make mistakes. So.
Well, that's the thing, man. Somebody mentioned it the other day. They're like, you and I, when we came up in the Marine Corps traveling, I think I have a shoebox full of pictures that is my 23 years in the Marine Corps. But today we would have, with the cell phones and stuff out there, everybody's an Instagram hero. I would probably have tens of thousands of pictures, right?
Yes. Hey, check this out, buddy.
Yeah.
That's just for you. Yeah.
I love it.
That was my last one, but yeah, you're right. It's a different time completely. But I'm thankful that I didn't come up in this particular environment for a lot of reasons, but that's definitely one, because a lot of stupid stuff that I did was not captured in a photo or on video. Yeah.
Okay. So, another thing you mentioned in the book, and again, if you're just joining us, someone shared this, Protection for and from Humanity by Todd Fox. This is round 2 of Todd Fox. One of the things you mentioned in your book, Todd, is planning and preparing for the, quote, high risk, low frequency event. Why is this approach a good approach, and what's so important about it?
So this comes from Gordon Graham. At least that's where I learned it from. I don't know of anybody else that uses that matrix or that particular verbiage, but high risk, low frequency is normally where things go wrong. And so I think, and in my understanding of it is, for the most part, is that high risk, obviously the consequences are very high, right? But the downside of that is that low frequency, it doesn't occur very much, means that agency, groups, teams, whatever entity, body doesn't spend the money or the time training to a high degree on that thing because it's extremely unlikely to occur. So that's where you have the mismatch where things go upside down. So in the realm of protection, I would say that 99+% of the time things go fine. They go according to plan. So, we're really training for the high risk event, something going wrong and it being potentially catastrophic. So it's a little bit different in our realm, but this is really what we're worried about. In law enforcement, I definitely believe, and I thankfully, I think it's kind of shifting a little bit, but we'll see if society tolerates it. They're saying, look, why would we spend the money and time on this when it's only happened twice in the last 10 years or 15 years? And that's kind of almost the approach with active shooter to some degree for a lot of people, although we're hearing a lot more about that. But for us, we live in that realm. We're really focused on it, and the easiest way for me to talk about it really is an insurance policy, right? I don't plan on going out and getting into a car accident today, but I still have an insurance policy for it. I don't plan on having my house burned down, but I still have an insurance policy for it. I don't plan on getting sick, but I still have health insurance. So, for me, high risk, low frequency really boils down to that. It's preparation for something that could be catastrophic through training, through exposures, through thinking about it in advance. And I don't know any other way that's better than saying it's an insurance policy.
Right. And, again, to borrow that metaphor about, I don't plan on my house burning down, but I have insurance, and I also have smoke alarms and fire extinguishers, et cetera.
Yes.
And if you're listening and you hear Todd say, 99% of the time, things they go well, but I want to stop there and say they go well because you've hand selected the driver, you've picked the routes, you've briefed the driver. He knows his job is to drive. These things you do ahead of time is why it's not like the God of War, Murphy, just smiles on you. It's because you put these contingencies in place, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Things aren't naturally. I mean, the natural order of things is chaos, right?
Yes,
so it's not naturally just going to fall into place. Of course, you have a structure that really kind of drives things or channels things to be positive or good or within certain parameters or tolerances. So yes, I absolutely agree with that. All of the advanced preparation and structuring and paying attention to it is really what likely prevents something from occurring in the first place. In other words, we're creating a harder target, right?
Yes. And, I think it was maybe in the last episode, this is round 2 with Todd Fox. So please go back and watch the first one. I don't remember if it was on the last one we talked about, but the environment you go into is going to dictate from the smallest thing of the environment you're going to go into, the threat that the client has, is going to dictate what level of armor, that kind of vehicle that you select. So there's everything about that goes into, and this is where I'm building with this. You write also in the book, Todd, about the criminal mind in relation to target hardening. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So really understanding the criminal mind, understanding, how they think and what they're after helps to prepare a plan for dealing with that type of person, that mindset. So, and I read about this in the book, criminals, generally speaking, are like business people, right? They're looking for something of value. They're not just, as a broad stroke, again, the vast majority are not just attacking someone for no reason. Now, that doesn't address people who are mentally ill. If you're walking down Skid Row, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the vast majority of crimes that occur. So, they're looking for something of value, and something of value can be your car, your wallet, your watch. It can also be the person. If we're talking about information, let's say you have access to a facility which houses certain information, you are of value. Or let's say you have a wife who loves you and is willing to pay to get you back. You yourself as a physical person are something of value. So we have to kind of know how that works. And then we have to be able to remove some of those things of value, so we're not low-hanging fruit for those types of criminals. And I think that also leads into understanding what the TTPs, or the tactics, techniques, and procedures are of criminals in a given region. And a lot of guys will say, well, how the hell do I know, what the TTPs are in this country or that country? And, there are a lot of ways to get that on the internet now, whether it's through a source that you're paying, or if you go to the State Department's website and you look at, crime and safety reports that are done by the regional security officer at an embassy in that country. But there's data out there available to you. And so if you know that, if you look at that, I think, you can study it and make your plans based on that.
Yeah. And so for someone who's protected everyone from Madonna, very high profile, needs to be seen, that's part of her job, and an executive that nobody's ever heard of, but is worth billions of dollars potentially. What are some of the different ways? I mean, you can't go gray man with Madonna and maybe, and or Tommy Lee, that they're probably not going to do that. But what are some of the ways that you've taken different clients and maybe target hardened them?
Even with Madonna, even with Tommy Lee, the first thing is that if you're hanging out in a realm where people expect to see them, people will be scanning, looking for them. Or if they see something similar, oh, that looks like Tommy Lee, and I know Motley Crue is doing a concert here, therefore it could be Tommy Lee, and now I'm going to go check it out. If you were to, like on Tommy, he's covered in tats. So if you threw a light long sleeve shirt over him, you're going to take away that ability. If he, he's had long and short hair and everything else, but if you put it in a ponytail, maybe they wouldn't recognize it. If you throw a hat on him or sunglasses, or if you're in a place where he's unlikely to go, you're probably not going to have as many people coming to look for that entity. So we try to remove some of the key signatures of that entity, right? If it, it could be a person, it could be their face. And by putting on a hat and some sunglasses, we reduce that signature a little bit, or by covering up tattoos, we reduce it, or by, like Tommy not being in a strip club or something like that, we would reduce the signature. Instead, we take him to church. But, the ideas for us are how we come in, how we go out. If I'm moving a person, for example, through a crowd, and I'm moving from the back to the front, if people are facing forward, I'm moving from the back to the front, I would advocate that the celebrity goes first, because as that person goes through, when they turn and look, they're going to see the second person, third person, fourth person. Whereas if I'm going from the front of a crowd to the back of a crowd, I would, generally speaking, want a larger person, or a person whose face is unrecognizable. And then I want the entity that's recognizable behind, right? So it would be a little bit different. And obviously, there are a lot of situations where that would change, but we just modify the situations and try to reduce signatures, and then times of arrival, times of departure, having distractions. We send out decoy cars sometimes when we have issues with paparazzi, or we slow paparazzi down. There are a lot of little things we do to affect timing, to affect awareness in an environment, and then to camouflage. So you're spot on when you say, Madonna, it's hard for her to be gray. It is. But there are things you can do to make her a little more gray. Not gray this way.
I've had on my good friend, Gage, who was Jennifer Lopez's bodyguard for years. And one of the things he talked about was managing the paparazzi. Like, guys, if you stand right here, you'll get a great shot. I mean, it's just like, because if you don't do something like that, they're just going to be everywhere.
Yeah, that's a
jockey.
proactive measure. Yeah. So ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's basically it. Just how do you manage all those variables? Because you talked about the 720 concept. Now throw in not just a threat, but just some asshole that wants to take a good photograph so he can make $100, you know?
Yeah, that actually is a little bit complex because there are a lot of variables there that you're trying to manage, right? Because the paparazzi, if they're following you at a high rate of speed, or they're cutting you off or something like that, they can be a significant physical threat. If you're dealing with a moving vehicle, or imagine they're tagging along and the principal's on a bike and she doesn't want them, or he doesn't want them there, and it's some type of nuisance, or it's a private thing with a family member. Even the entity, the protectee, crashing on the bike can hurt them, can stop, the filming if their face gets messed up, can stop, a concert if they're a drummer and their hands get hurt. So those are pretty big deals. So what your buddy did is he was proactive in going out and controlling as much of the equation as he could by selecting the least intrusive option, which is in a specific spot. There are other factors, like let's say you're talking about a female getting in a car and the paparazzi is trying to get an upshot when she's wearing a skirt, and you're trying to cut that off, right? You're trying to cut off the angle by putting him, like, let's say, at higher ground, which normally you wouldn't want a potential adversary to have higher ground. But in that case, higher ground affords you the ability to cut off that upshot, from the camera. Maybe you don't want them to know where you're going. Like, it's predictable that they're going to be at, let's say, this event, but you don't want them to follow you back to a villa. When you're in a hotel, it's a little bit harder, but the more options that you have at a hotel, for example, you have, let's say, underground, or you have above ground, or there's a helipad on the roof, or there's a service entrance, or whatever. The more you have options there, usually the easier it is to control and manipulate movement in and out and create distractions and controlling paparazzi. But paparazzi, a lot of times, are also like criminals, and like us, they're business people. So they're just looking to get a thing. And also, one thing I'll say about that, and your friend probably told you this, but you're going to see the same people over and over and over again. No matter who you're with. If I'm with an executive and he's high profile in the moment, if I'm with an actor and he or she is high profile in the moment, a singer, musician, whoever, I'm going to see the same paparazzi in the same cities. I'm going to see the same TMZ people at LAX. It's going to happen. So if you can at least build a rapport, maybe they won't Shanghai you, and maybe you can give them something that's of value to them while you're not hurting yourself. And if you have the relationship with the client, sometimes, and with many of the clients that we have, we'll say, hey, sir, ma'am, whoever it is, we're going to face this. What would you like to do? This is what I would recommend, but we'll default to what you want so long as it's safe. Are you okay with this? Or are you okay with that? Or here's one for you, Rich. Sir or ma'am, can you please put this in your hand and hold it against your chest like this as we walk out of whatever it may be, but not my thing. Let's say it's their thing, so they're trying to promote something. So, hey, make sure you have a copy of that new book, or make sure you have whatever it is that you're trying to convey, and we'll utilize the paparazzi and they'll utilize you, and everybody kind of wins. And we don't create the unnecessary chaos that can lead to somebody getting hurt.
Yeah. R.I.P. Diana and Dodi Fayed, right?
Yes, that's a great example.
Man. So, Todd, I've kept you on here for over an hour. Thank you so much for your time, brother. Let's just kind of end with a big general statement. For those that want to be harder to kill, what are some of the key takeaways that they can do?
Again, this comes back to all the subjects that we've talked about in terms of mindset, but and also studying kind of criminal behaviors in your area. So whether you're at home in whatever area you're in, I'm in St. Louis, which is a dangerous place. But start to study the stats, start to understand what is most likely to occur, what regions or areas in that town or space that it's likely to occur, and then what are the countermeasures for those particular types of attacks. Obviously, early ID and situational awareness will prevent a lot of that stuff, but sometimes you get caught in the middle. And if you know what it is or what it looks like when it's approaching you, or how things tend to unfold, you're more likely to survive that and thrive in that particular type of realm. Another component for me in terms of being harder to kill is to constantly be training your mind, making your mind pliable, aware of things, seeing things, understanding things. And that's one component. I need to understand the criminal mind. I need to understand why this is happening. What is it that they want? And then in addition to building the strength of my mind, another component, and we talked about this as well, is building the strength of your body, being able to endure something. And first of all, being able to physically overcome somebody in a fight. And if you haven't spent the time training, martial arts or something akin to that, if you don't have your firearm, it's a little bit harder, but at least being able to physically endure that and not have a heart attack in the process, and being able to maybe withstand punishment and not end up hurting your spine or some other area of your body that was weak because you didn't train it. So train the brain, train the mind, have countermeasures, know your environment. I think those things will solve most problems most of the time. And then there are other shit sandwiches that, there's not much you can do about, but I think that's the approach to take.
No, I love it. I forget who said it. I'd love to give him credit, but I can't remember who said it. You can't shoot a heart attack in the face, man. You're got to take care of your body. Whoever said it was
right. Yeah, that's a simple fact, right?
But our community, we want to really lay in heavy on the hard skills. In reality, it's more of the soft skills that, and like you said, I've never shot anybody in the United States of America. And part of the reason why you haven't is probably because of all the good TTPs you put in place.
It's true. Something's gone wrong if that happens. But, I agree that you made a good point there on the out, which is that I love, you love, most of us love, probably most of your viewers love the hard skills. I love them. The problem is in day-to-day life, most of the time, we're dealing with the soft skills. What prevents the hard skills from happening normally are the soft skills. And it's not as fun. It's not as sexy to do, but man, you got to do it.
Yeah. Alan Kelly says, another great show with great information. My good friend Michael Gentili says, you have a real talent for engaging all the genius that is so prevalent and underreported in our culture. Thank you both. And Jeff says, thank you, Rich and Todd. Todd, any closing comments? Where can I find your book?
Tourprotection.com is the preferred location. So tourprotection.com, you can also find a little bit of information out about the business. To be very transparent, I prefer you buy it directly from me on that site, because otherwise you are funding Amazon, which, it's what it is. But it is on Amazon. It is on iTunes or Apple Books now. It's on Barnes and Noble. You can find it all over the place. But my preference, if you're able to make the choice, is to buy it from us directly. Not only do we make a little bit more money, but you're supporting, like-minded people. And the website, like I said, will also have some information. We talk about the clients that talk about us, so we can't give away information, governmental or executives or anybody that doesn't mention that we protect them. But, if you want to see some of the celebrities that we deal with, that's also a good site while you're looking for the book.
Yeah. So there's a link in there, tourprotection.com. You can check that out and support those that are on here, giving their time willingly to help you guys become better. Can't recommend it enough. I've read it at least once, and I'll read it again for sure, because one of the things that I really like about the book is it's not a bunch of fuzzy generalities. There's actionable things that you can put in place today to make you and your family harder to kill. Todd, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Rich. Good talking to you.
Yeah, always great talking to you, brother. Guys, thank you for being on the show this morning. Thank you to those that are watching YouTube or listen on the podcast, The American Warrior Show. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully this has been worthwhile for you. And remember, folks, the fight is coming. Be ready.